ships on vigor of the waves of skim and barren summits to the verdant plains. Each horizon is a new beginning, rise and reign. Far from the fjords and the ice-cold currents, brave and soar over new frontiers. Songs and sagas of a fate determined, shields and spears. Vows of favor or the thrill of plunder, pulled together for the clan and kin. Clank of hammers and the crash of thunder, pound within. Oh, the echoes of eternity. Oh, Valhalla calling me. To pluck the strings of destiny. Valhalla calling me. Valhalla calling me.
Most people practice a muted Asatru. They're not hyper-religious, they don't go around, preaching or whatever the fuck. But they do have, little altars in their homes, and they do, on holidays, do their thing. That's the majority. There are little communities here and there, and I'm talking mostly about German colonies, because that's what I know the most about. My understanding is that American colonies are pretty diverse. I did have an altar who lived for several years in a Russian colony, and there was an active Russian Orthodox church there, and there were actually even several of the locals, the native population of the planet, who had been baptized in the Russian Orthodox Church. So it varies, but in general it's a muted Asatru. When you get into the military and into the really, really upper echelons of society, there's Schwarze Sonne, which is a dark Asatru, I guess, where they drink black goo and all that. And the practices do vary by colony, of course, such as on New Atlantis they do orgies. It's all with consenting adults, so it's not really terribly fucked up or anything. It's just, they do that in order to bring forward their ancestors. And apparently it works. I mean, somebody comes when they're doing that. Someone shows up every time, or so I'm told. I don't remember ever participating, but apparently someone does show up. So, to them, I guess it's worth it. I would think it would be insanely awkward if you're, getting it on with all your friends and your grandmother shows up, but to each their own. Okay, yeah.
What are the main tenets of the Asatru religion? What are some of the must-dos and taboos? When are their festivals and how are they celebrated?
The main tenets are that it is a form of ancestor worship. They worship the Norse gods as their ET ancestors. They do not worship them as gods in the way that we would think of them. They don't strictly believe in divinity or a god at all, like how most people would think of it. They're not atheist, but they're also not atheist, if that makes any sense. So they view it as honoring and worshipping their ancestors, striving to live like them as much as they can, because they see the past, that era, as utopian, and it gets them a lot of favors, or at least they think it does, so they consider that worth it. What are some of the must-dos and taboos? That varies enormously from planet to planet. The general must-dos are maintaining some level of genetic purity, as well as, in general, not always, but usually, refraining completely and totally from using cybernetics, although there are tons of people who break that all the time, especially within the military, but it's viewed as a major taboo. And you have to have a decent character, at least in public, don't be being drunk in public, that sort of thing. Don't be a drug addict. Don't be gay if you can help it, which, by the way, I don't agree with, but that's how they think of it. and, you know, don't be a pedophile. Otherwise, they let you do pretty much whatever you want. You know, it's not one of those religions where you're not allowed to participate in like interfaith activities or things like that. They don't care about that. They'll let you marry whoever you want. You can sleep with whoever you want, pretty much, that sort of thing. Oh, when are their festivals and how are they celebrated? That varies again by planet. They celebrate their festivals during major celestial events. Eclipses, particularly, changes of orbit, if that's a thing in whatever solar system they're in, that sort of thing. And how they're celebrated varies again, but usually it involves a lot of drinking and you're encouraged to like get laid that night, drink a lot, and you know, be joyful to the gods, or be joyful to your ancestors, and all of that. So that's, you know, a very, very Norse type of thing. That's how they generally celebrate. Sometimes it depends on the culture and the what the main industry is on the planet. For instance, like in agricultural planets, they'll often have also have really grand feasts, and they'll have all the chefs come out and compete to make the most elaborate and fabulous dishes, and they'll give part of it as an offering, and they'll eat the rest and have a grand feast. If it's a really snowy planet, they might celebrate by going out and hunting for new furs or things like that, or by showing off their new furs. That I remember that sort of thing. So it all varies quite a bit planet to planet.
Do they still worship or communicate with the Vanir, Valkyries, elves, and dwarves?
Not really elves and dwarves, because those guys aren't really different from the rest of us, so they don't worship them or communicate with them. The Vanir and the Valkyries, yes, absolutely, they do that to a huge extent, because, you know, the Vanir are fertility related, and fertility is kind of the biggest tenet of their entire civilization, is, you know, breeding and producing more and more babies to grow the empire more. And the Valkyries, yes, because particularly the military guys, yes, because they all want to go to Valhalla. So yeah, they still do that.
Did they ever find out who Odin, Thor, Loki, and the other old gods really were or are? Do they contact them in this realm or another?
Yeah, they're the Anunnaki in nearly all cases. One exception is Odin's mother. In all likelihood, I mean, of course, these are all really ancient records that have been passed down and, you know, fairy tale-ized over the years, so there's, you know, you're never going to know fully everything. But in all likelihood, Odin's mother, the woman they have is Odin's mother in the Eddas, was actually one of his stepmothers, because Odin's real mother, Odin is Enki, his real mother was a Draco princess, so the ice giant, quote-unquote, was one of his stepmothers, who was an ancient builder race, one of the last remaining ones in that period, woman who, and the ancient builder race, for people who don't know, they looked just like us, but they were 30 feet tall. So she was one of those, and I guess since she was recorded as an ice giant, she probably came from a really cold planet. Do they contact them in this realm or another? Yes, they do. They contact them through divination and oracles. They do have to keep it somewhat religiousified, I guess, so they don't just use their regular telepath. They have someone who gets high and contacts them, because I guess people like that more. I guess it has more of a religious-y spectacle to it, so, you know, it's the same old story, really, of making something more complicated and religiousified than it needs to be. But yeah, they contact them. Who is their main god figure now? It's still pretty much Odin. I mean, who else gets venerated varies from planet to planet. A lot of civilians in particular venerate Hel, particularly civilian women venerate Hel quite a lot, whereas military guys, more often than not, venerate Odin and Freya, and Thor also, because they all want to go to Valhalla and be you know, big tough guys in the here and now, you know, that sort of thing.
What are the tenets of the Schwarze Sonne? Why is drinking black goo and sacrificing animals and people a necessary practice for them? Do they actually have a scientific understanding of the black goo?
They don't exactly have tenets. They're not exactly a religion. They're a lifestyle choice. You know, they're like people who decide to dress a certain way and move out into the woods and take mushrooms all day. They're not worshiping anything, and they don't really have a moral code associated with them. It's just a method of living your life. But why is drinking black goo and sacrificing animals and people a necessary practice for them? Because that's how they get to their ascended level, what they view as an ascended level, where they have extremely high IQs. They are not bound to emotion. They're in perfect health all the time, and they age very slowly. You know, doing those sorts of things, drinking black goo and sacrificing animals and people and eating them. They have to eat them too and drink their blood. That's a big part of it. You know, if you do those things, you will achieve quite a lot in life. I'm most certainly not promoting those things, but you will achieve a lot in life if you do those things. Do they actually have a scientific understanding of the black goo? Yeah, completely. They know what it is. They've studied it in labs. They know that it's nanobots, that they're essentially single-celled organisms that proliferate and reproduce themselves at a constant rate. That there is a certain type of rock, I don't remember what kind of rock it is, but the black goo cling to the rock, and they cannot become unclung unless the rock is heated to a certain temperature, and then the black goo flows out of it again. So, and I don't know quite what causes that. I guess it's some sort of chemical reaction that causes that to happen.
Is the black cube AI worship practiced by the elites there?
No. That is a Zeta Reticulan phenomenon that spread to some degree into Islam. It is not a part of Schwarze Sonne religion. It is, again, the Schwarze Sonne religion is not really even a religion. They don't worship anything. They don't believe in God. Most of them are militant atheists. It's just a way to get ahead in life for them. And they've culturized it so that they rope in some of these old quote-unquote gods. Sometimes. Martian Schwarze Sonne, for example, does that. However, for instance, Vega Prime Schwarze Sonne does not do that. They are completely disconnected from anything religious.
Is Vril still their religious order? What do they do?
Yes, it is still a religious order. I think I mentioned earlier in the education episode that there are systems in place, very strict systems in place in the schooling system of the Breakaway, to where they have to keep an eye out for the slightest sign of a child being psychic, and also all children pretty much are subjected to tests at an early age to see if they might be psychic. So psychic girls have to either join the military or join the Vril. Legally. It's a legal requirement. And so Vril women, Vril girls in the Breakaway, they serve as oracles for their colonies or for their neighborhoods and so forth. They have to, learn how to handle certain drugs that they take, and they have to learn how to, they have to dress a certain way, they have to learn certain languages and things like that. And so they do that to serve as oracles, and you go and you hire them and they give you advice on this or that. Or they will divine your future and all sorts of things. All the things you would have found people doing with, for example, the ancient Greeks used to do with oracles, what some Chinese people still do with fortune tellers. That's what they do.
I know that you know a Vril priestess who's a celebrity on Earth. Any interesting story connected with her?
Her name on Earth is Rachel Weisz. She was in probably her best known movie was the Mummy movies in the late 90s, early 2000s. My alter Heinrich was looking for an arms dealer who had gone into hiding on this colony. He knew that this guy would probably be hanging out with one of a set of families who were in this colony, and he knew that this particular oracle lady was the one that all these families used, and that they would have told her a secret, such as that they were hiding an arms dealer in their attic. And so Heinrich went to her and he interrogated her, and she caved pretty quickly, because the way that society works is if someone in the military asks you for something, you have to do it right then and there. And the more you resist, the worse your punishment is going to be. so she didn't resist too much. She still got a light prison sentence of several years for resisting at all. That's how that society functions. So, yeah, that was that story. I don't remember the people's names or anything like that, but yeah, that's the story connected with her.
You said that you found some German artists of the past whose works point to them knowing something. Can you describe a couple of works and what is so special about them?
The two that come to mind the most are Fidus, F-I-D-U-S, and also Ludwig Fahrenkrog. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Fahrenkrog, he painted a number of images of, like, quote-unquote gods talking to man, and people out in the woods talking to the quote-unquote gods and their ancestors. He was of the Volkish tradition. In fact, he was one of the founders of the Volkish tradition. Very strong Nazi ties and all that. And he also painted several images that I know, that I recognize as being off-planet scenes. Which brings us to Fidus, the other one, who painted what I know for a fact are off-planet scenes. He painted one of the main temples in one of the colonies of Centurion. I'm certain he was a time traveler. Fidus, absolutely. I'm certain he was a time traveler. And he also painted images of, like, human-animal chimeras, and one image that is very clearly some type of alien person. So yeah, those guys, and they were both founders or very influential upon the Volkish movement, as I mentioned a minute ago, which was the precursor to the Nazi movement for all intents and purposes. And their works are still fairly commonly seen being spread around by, like, neo-Nazi groups and stuff today. Which, by the way, they were not Nazis during their lifetimes. At all. They were actually very progressive in their day, but, you know, Nazis will co-opt anything if it makes them look good, and their art does look incredible. They were extremely talented people, especially Fidus, and his work is one of those things where it's like, it almost seems like he had to have been doing that for thousands of years in order to get that good, which is a big part of why I think that he was a time traveler. And also based on the fact that he painted certain images, such as the Centurion Temple, that did not exist until after his lifetime supposedly ended.
What are the religious practices of the breakaway Japanese? Did they ever find out who were some of their old gods? Who are their ET ancestors?
Basically, they practice usually Moloch worship intermingled with Shintoism, usually just more or less just in aesthetic ways. Like their Moloch temples, they look like Shinto temples, and things like, and they do some Shinto prayers and things like that, because I do have memories of several of the Arasaka kids doing Shinto prayers at times. So yeah, I remember that. And my Harune Arasaka, the one who was in my life so much, who will be in the book quite heavily, is he referred to himself as a lapsed Shinto. So that Shintoism is still relevant, but it's really Moloch worship. And Moloch is another ET. He is from the Taurus constellation, and he is a minotaur. Body roughly like that of a man, the head of a bull, furry. They usually have tails. Some of them have hooves, but most of them do not. Moloch does have hooves. That's considered it's a status symbol in their society for whatever reason. And the worship of him involves, again, like, you know, sacrificing people, drinking their blood, that sort of thing. And that summons Moloch, and he will do favors for you, either through just his psionic capabilities or through his connections. He'll do things that seem miraculous, because, of course, he also has ET technology, and as insanely advanced as SSP technology is, it's still nothing compared to what the ETs actually have and use for themselves. So the stuff they give us that becomes SSP technology is like children's toys. It's nothing to them. What they have is stuff that I don't even have the language to describe how advanced it can be. So, did they ever find out who were some of their old gods? I imagine they would have looked into that. I don't know that much about that, to be perfectly honest, but I'm sure that they would have. And who are their ET ancestors? Their ET ancestors, well, at the beginning, all Terran humans looked pretty much the same. They all looked roughly like Persian, Arab, North Indian, until someone decided after creating them, oh wait, there's no way to tell who owns these people, let's give them different skin colors. And eventually, further along the line, some horny Rigelians came along and started interbreeding with Terran human women, and that created the East Asiatic peoples. And what Rigelians are, they look roughly like an East Asian person. Probably the closest would be Japanese, if you were to really get hyper-specific, or possibly like far eastern part of China, southeastern China, or Japan would be the closest ethnic groups that they look like. They're about 4 feet tall. Yeah, they showed up and were basically interbreeding with the women of, and I'm sure some of the human men also took Rigelian wives. I have no doubt that happened. And what came out eventually was the East Asian people that we know and love today.
Has the esoteric been demystified in the Breakaway? I.e., do they know about different realms of existence and the beings in them? And things like death, reincarnation, etc. are not an enigma to them anymore?
Absolutely, yes. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you notice, first of all, when you acknowledge that religion is bullshit, and then after that, when you have the correct technology and outside help and outside knowledge to be able to really investigate these things. They acknowledge and they know they have an understanding of the soul, a scientific understanding of the soul, which I explained in the Arts and Education episode earlier in this series. They know about different realms of existence because, for one thing, their ships enter them. When their ships go into quote-unquote hyperspace, that's the 5th dimension that they're entering, which is the afterlife area. That's where Valhalla and all of these other places are located that they want to get to so badly. And yeah, they know about the beings in them because, again, they go through them every time that they travel more than a few light years. They go into this other dimension, or density rather, and things like death, reincarnation, etc. are not an enigma to them anymore. Yeah, again, because they know where the afterlife is, and they also know that the soul can also just go to a different body if it wants to, and that's not a problem, and it often does. And there are actually little micro-religions or micro-sects in certain colonies where they don't actually plan to go to Valhalla or to Niflheim or these places, where they actually do specifically want to like kite their life path so that they can reincarnate in another body, either in another human body and continue their own cycle, or in an alien body of an alien species that they venerate. Those are not common or really all that socially acceptable religious things, but they do exist. You know, I guess humans have a tendency to create little cults everywhere we go.
You mentioned the Germans wanting to go to Valhalla. What is their modern understanding of it?
Valhalla is a little, it's a pocket land in the 5th dimension, or the afterlife, which, by the way, is, this is further proof that the whole New Age thing is a CIA psyop and part of the depopulation agenda, because to get to the 5th dimension, you have to die. You can't just go there normally. You have to either you can't stay there when you go by ship, actually. You have to, the ship will have to come out eventually with the physical things intact. So, you have to die to get there. So yeah, that's an important note to put in.
If the Germans know that their old gods are really ETs, why do they still worship them as gods? And do the Anunnaki get something from it?
Well, like I've mentioned before, they don't worship them as gods at all. They worship them as their ancestors, which is quite a different thing. It is still worship, but it is on a much more even footing than as a creator entity, you know. Do the Anunnaki get something from it? Yeah, they get, they get a big ego boost, and they also, usually a lot of the deals made are for personnel. So they get German personnel to go do their bidding and everything, or to be sometimes their sex slaves, which they need a lot of. Particularly, they need male sex slaves because nearly all of their men are sterile. So they take a lot of human men as sex slaves.
Did the Anunnaki ever show up and try to reclaim their divinity with the Germans directly? Do they require blood sacrifice too?
I imagine they would have, knowing what they're like, but they did not succeed. I'm sure there are still some pockets and like cults who do think they are actually gods, but like that would be very much a fringe, not accepted opinion, and it's just not borne out when you know what ETs are like and what they're capable of, and then you see and talk to an Anunnaki, you know very well that that's not a god. You know that that's basically you but smarter. That's all that they really are. Oh, and do they require blood sacrifice too? No, they do not. The worship, they usually require either food offerings or sex rituals. That's it. They would not accept a blood sacrifice. They would say that that was like barbaric and disgusting to them.
If Enki's mom is a Draco princess, does he have reptilian features?
Actually, no. Strangely enough, I suppose they probably did some genetic engineering, so he wouldn't, because he would not have been accepted as king by the rest of the Anunnaki if he didn't look the same as them.
How did the Japanese end up worshipping Moloch of all things? Did he have a following in ancient Japan, or somehow lured them into it later?
I don't know if he had a following in ancient Japan. The elites of Japan had been following that religion for a very long time, at least long enough that they were well into it by the time they got invited off-world. So I couldn't tell you the ins and outs of how it came to be.
Do any of the mystic groups of the Breakaway have an updated understanding of what God consciousness might be and how to connect with it?
I believe some of them do. They, at least to an extent, I imagine it involves using a lot of drugs, for one thing, but I think some of them have had success with it, but again, they're so stigmatized that people don't really ask them questions that much.
Are the esoteric practices like astrology, palm reading, etc. still practiced by the Breakaway Society? Do they have more updated versions of them?
They still do astrology. Of course, every planet has different configurations of stars that are visible from it and different, everything. So it's, the astrology of every colony is different. But yeah, they still do astrology. They would not do palm reading because that would be viewed as like a gypsy practice and be looked down upon quite heavily. At least I imagine. It's possible that some people might do it, but I don't have any memories of ever encountering it. Do they have more updated versions of them? I guess they scientify it more. They've worked out why it is that astrology works. I don't know exactly why it works either, but a lot of times it does. Like, if you've ever done your birth chart, you'd probably find it was pretty accurate. So they've figured out what the scientific reasoning for that is. I don't know what it is exactly myself, but they do.
Which ETs are known to provide the best esoteric services? Has your alter Heinrich ever used them?
To a large degree, Mintaka and Orion groups. They kind of look like dark elves. They're more of a dark green than like a dark gray. Yeah, they're dark green elfish people, about between 9 and 14 feet tall, usually. They're known for their esoteric services. Has my alter Heinrich ever used them? For diplomatic purposes, yeah. Like, there are some cultures that are really dependent on, like, religion, and they'll respect you a lot more if you partake in their religious practices, even if it's just once. He doesn't take any of it seriously, particularly. He's actually kind of a militant atheist, if anything. But, he'll do what he has to do for his job.
If some groups in space practice Christianity, did they ever find out more about Jesus' story? Or maybe know if he was fathered by an ET?
Yes, this is an interesting one, and I may be the first person to ever tell this publicly. Because this is taught in Shula, even in a decidedly, non-Christian colony, such as the one that Heinrich went to. They still teach it because it's such a huge part of history. According to them, probably they sent time travelers back to observe it, would be my guess, so that they would have an accurate story. According to them, Jesus was actually from Aldebaran. He was, for some reason, possibly because he was going to have brown hair, but no one is certain, it was known that he would not survive long in Aldebaran. It also may have been because of political ramifications, but no one knows for certain why. But so as an embryo, he was brought to Earth and placed in Mary's womb. Mary probably was not her real name, of course. You know, they were writing a politically upheaving book. The folks who wrote the Bible were writing a politically upsetting book. So I imagine that they used fake names, but it is also known that he did not actually die, that his supposed death was a ritual, and that he then went to what is now France with Mary Magdalene and had the children who became the Merovingian kings and queens, and their children and everyone became the royalty all across Europe. So I think that's about it. I can say there is a book people can read about his life in France. It's called The Templar Revelation, Guardians of the Secret Identity of Christ by Lynn Pickett. Wonderful, wonderful book. People should read that. Can't link in the description to a free PDF, unfortunately, but if you look online, you will find the PDF of it.
Is it generally known in the programs which ET groups are pulling the strings of the organized religion on Earth? Can you name a couple of examples?
Nothing about Earth is generally known because they all think that Earth was destroyed, but the higher-ups and people in the intelligence field do know, at least to a degree. The Vatican is run essentially by the Orion Syndicate, Draco. Not the Draco Empire, the Orion Syndicate Draco, are who run the Vatican. Let's see. Islam is too, diverse and weird to nail down who exactly is running it, although they say that Allah was likely Enlil. It even sounds kind of similar, you'll notice. So, from its earliest origins was probably Enlil, and, Muhammad was a puppet of Enlil, but there are too many different versions of Islam and ways of practicing it that it's just kind of its own thing. Hinduism is run sort of by Enki. Again, there are things that have been inserted over the years that he does not particularly approve of or intend. He did not intend vegetarianism to become such a thing. He is not a vegetarian. And some of the weird shit like the widow sacrifice and the extreme obsession with chastity, even though they also have the Kama Sutra, but they're still kind of obsessed with chastity. He did not intend those things, but it originates from him. And by the way, Enki is Shiva, or Shiva is Enki. Yeah, I think that's good.
What are some of the interesting religious practices of the ET societies that stand out? Can humans convert to them if they wish?
It depends on which one. Again, there's no one-way answer to that question, but what are some practices that stand out? I remember one ocean planet where you had to go on basically a ceremonial hunt. You had to find this certain kind of creature, and you had to hunt one, and you had to use this kind of spear that was made out of a pink crystal and bring it home and cook it in a certain way and stuff. It's kind of a fuzzy memory, but I remember doing something like that, or seeing and hearing about doing something like that, I should say. I did not convert to their religion, but I knew those were the practices. Some Pleiadian religions do ceremonial orgies. Yeah, that's a thing, and actually that's fairly common. Alright, those are the ones that really stick out. I don't believe Solarans are allowed to convert to the one on the ocean planet. It's a fish people who live there, they're trout-like. I don't believe you're allowed to convert to that one. You are allowed to convert to Pleiadian religions.
And lastly, suppose someone wants to go to Valhalla after death and enjoy their 10,000 Norse virgins. Can one go without becoming a damn Nazi? What are the official requirements? This is for a friend, not myself.
No, you don't have to be a Nazi. You do have to be a Norse pagan, and you also have to have died in battle. Yeah, that's your requirements, pretty much. I don't think you're making it, sorry. And I don't think your friend is going to make it either, but maybe your friend is desperate.